Okay. Tell me if you see it full screen. Let me get it going. Is that full screen? Or
you need to swap.
Yeah, it is, I think.
You need to swap to
Oh no, this is viewer mode or whatever they call it, review mode. So this is what the so you need just to find the other another monitor with there you go.
There you go.
good. Well, we're really pleased on our 17th PNWAS Zoom meeting where we're exploring the Chehalis River hypothesis and their first movement of people to have one of the countries in the world's expert on these early movements and having a date of 18,000. We can ponder here for the oldest human artifacts and that's Dr. Patrick O'Grady. I unfortunately didn't change this title sign, but he's currently district archaeologist for the BLM in the Burns district, Oregon. He's, I'm sure, still affiliated with Oregon, University of Oregon, and he worked for years as a research scientist at the Museum of Natural and Cultural History. Our last talk in this double hitter, as we call it, was by Lauren Davis, Oregon State University, on his work in Cooper's Ferry in western Idaho, where he's pretty well. One thing about Dr. O'Grady is he's worked a lot with Clovis points, and Lauren is finding 16,000-year-old dates on a series of stemmed points in his site. And if you missed that, it's on our PNWAS YouTube channel. If you just go in and look at PNWAS YouTube, you can find that on the internet. And so he's discovered a number of things. One thing I appreciate about Dr. O'Grady is he's a zooarchaeologist, and we had a chance to talk a little bit about what Ed Carrier and I are doing about his recording, how he made a living off the land in our next talk. But he found platelets of camel teeth fragments. These camel itself evolved in our continent, America, and migrated over. And so the camels you see over in the old world came from here, and the ones still here are the llama alpacas and vicuñas and those in South America. And these were native to our area to about 11,000. He has a number of date surprises, I think, to share with us tonight. But the 18,000-year-old chalcedony stone tool was found with an extinct bison blood residue and beautiful chalcedony scraper there. His site, here's the Chehalis River we link into. If you're coming down the coast with the coastal migration route, which we highly support, you're probably able to go into inland a bit, but not through the glaciers so much, but certainly up into Lake Quinault, and we have some megafauna we want to date there. And then you could come down, and eventually you're going to hit the Chehalis drainage that drained Lake Russell after the ice melted. And so if you come in here, you certainly can make your way to the Columbia River, make your way across there and back down. And they seem to really like these basin lake areas like Bonneville and Fort Rock Cave, which in fact Dr. O'Grady worked on. Here's a drone shot of his site, and this is actually the removal of the backfill. I'm finding out. I thought they had problems with the flooding. They did last summer. And he he worked for at least 19 years in the field and continues to do that. And he did focus on some of his research on Clovis technologies in Southeast Oregon. And certainly looking at hunter and gatherers in those early time periods. It's an area of the Paiute today, so he hopes to work more with them now that he's moved over by the site. And a zooarchaeologist, as I mentioned, I see on Facebook several times him collecting roadkill for his comparative collections that he rendered. He's interested in remote sensing, and he worked on his master's on human occupation patterns in the uplands and analysis sourced obsidian projectile points from playa villages in the Fort Rock uplands, Lake County, Oregon, and that was at the University of Oregon. He got his BS and his MA, and his PhD is Before Winter Comes. Before Winter Comes, archaeological investigations of the settlement and subsistence in Harney Valley, Harney County, Oregon. And currently, in a big transition, we're really had some logistics to get him here, but he's currently the district archaeologist for the Bureau of Land Management of Burns District. He quite generously, they couldn't transfer his PowerPoint and other files over to a federal system, so he went back to his house in Eugene to do this talk, which we really appreciate the effort to do that. Our winter talk will be Ed Carrier and myself. I'm hoping that on leap year, February 29th, Ed's still in town. Sometimes he goes south about then. But we're dealing with what he wanted to do called living off the land, their first half of his life. Being raised by Julia Jacobs' great-grandmother, who was born in 1874, and basically making a living, had nothing but their allotment, Indian allotment, off of shellfish fisheries, a lot of hunting, but mostly ducks and berry crops and things like that. And I'm comparing that to just like we did with basketry that we replicated, that's up to 4,500 years old. I'm comparing that to up to 4,000-year-old sites, the fauna and the flora in the Salish Sea within 20 miles of where he lives, just to see how continuous this focus on a rich resource for 4,000 years has created these highly complex communities, Northwest Salish communities, and learning a lot about how rich this area has been. And it is a ton of continuity. And he adds more than just the count of the bones or the frequency. He adds how these animals and plants are procured, how to make the capturing things like this gill net of his, how to make containers for packing hundreds of pounds of shellfish he would get in a night. How they used nets in the Salish area, great big nets, which he makes out of nettle fibers that are in flyways, and how they would get hundreds of ducks in a night if they do it right, scaring them through the nets. It's the only place in the Northwest coast where they netted ducks. He certainly tells us how, well, here's a good picture of one of his, and I bought him this decoy so you can see how the ducks get snarled in here. His great grandmother, there's stories of her when she was a bit younger following her parents. Chief Walhalchun, Chief, and his wife Wishidat, to pull ducks out of these nets at Agate Path. And oops, I missed it here. and how he butchered the ducks, gives us a good idea of what we should find in the sites, how they use the down, how they use the feathers, and the fisheries, salmon, of course, with salmon traps he makes out of these cedar limbs and root fish traps that go into the weir. One of his favorite fish, and there's lots of them, but one of them is this midshipman that's called a grunter fish that he gets from under rocks at certain times. The males go in and protect the eggs, and when you reach in to get them with a hook, they grunt very loud. That's why they called that. But they're delicious fish, and here he has a seasons of or a number of grunter fishes that he got. So anyway, we're excited about it. I didn't think that would come together too well when he said I want to do living off the land, how I made a living for the first half of my life with my family. It's uncles and aunties and others on the allotment, and then I thought, well, let's compare it to the sites, and a lot of continuity there. He actually, most of the zoological data is just the counts of bones and somewhat the frequencies, not a whole lot about how these animals are captured, how they're prepared, how they're cooked, how they taste, how they're stored. These are all things Ed's no doubt doing that has some continuity. So we're really lucky tonight to have Dr. O'Grady. I really appreciate you taking the trip back over to Eugene, and so let's have them start, and again, really appreciate you doing this for us. Well, I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to have Patrick come in.
I'm really glad to be here, y'all. Thank you for bringing me in. So let's see.
You're a lifetime member now.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's see. I've got to find my way back to where I can share this screen. And I'm not seeing. Share the screen. Okay. How's that look? Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Looks good.
Everybody see it fine?
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, thanks so much. I had been expecting to add a few more slides and configure this a little differently than I ended up doing, but it turns out that with my new employment as a federal archaeologist, that you have to go through quite a few steps to transfer files from an old university computer to a federal computer that involves driving to another district office 150 miles away and having all the files scanned and all of that. So anyway, it was a interesting process getting ready for this tonight, but let's just jump right in here. And can you see my cursor moving across the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this first view right here is of Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. And the rock shelter itself is just a very modest sort of a basalt feature along the edge of an old stream channel. You can see the channel width right here. The rock shelter area is over here. And the channel actually in this direction is flowing downstream towards Silver Creek and eventually Malheur and Harney Lakes. But if you follow upstream, it goes like where I am standing here and curves up this way and back behind us off the photo. So the stream channel is right here. The rock shelter area is right here. And you can see it's not really much of a rock shelter at all. It's more like just a windbreak in a pretty bleak and wide open landscape. So this photograph here shows what the rock shelter looked like when we first discovered it back in 2009. So Scott Thomas was the BLM district archaeologist at that time, and he was providing help to us when we were working at a Clovis site down the road about 5 miles called the Sheep Mountain Clovis site. Scott kept driving back and forth running errands for us, and he saw this little basalt rim off in the distance from the main road and thought he'd drop in to have a look. And when he got back there, he noticed a couple of things. One was that the sagebrush growing in front of the rock shelter area was about 6 to 8 feet tall, which indicated that there were deep sediments there and moisture. And so uh, sediments that have been deposited and stabilized in an area like this in Eastern Oregon are really uncommon. Most of it's pretty eroded and windswept. And so we don't get a lot of protected sediments in a tucked away area like this. And so he got pretty interested in that. He noticed also that the sediments that were right up against the rock wall there were darker than they were as you get out further towards the stream channel, and he thought that that suggested that there might be buried hearth deposits there that were darkening the sediments and altering the general sort of an appearance of the dirt back right up against the wall. So the other thing he noticed when he was looking down is that there was a 8,000 to 12,000 year old stem point broken in half right at his feet, and there were no other artifacts on the surface. And so to him, that indicated, first of all, that you have a very old site there, and also that you have a place that hasn't been eroded away and that hasn't been discovered by artifact collectors. So that was in 2009. And Scott came and found me down at Sheep Mountain, and we came back and looked at the place, and then we developed a plan for doing work there that involved surveys, pedestrian surveys by Oregon Archaeological Society volunteers, test excavations in 2011 and 2012, and then a full-scale 6-week-long field school in 2012 and again in the years to follow. That was a University of Oregon BLM Archaeological Field School collaboration. So there's a whole laundry list of the times that we've been here working at this site. But ultimately what it amounts to is we've spent 58 weeks of excavation, survey, test excavation, a variety of different approaches to working at this rock shelter that amount to over a full year of time working at the site. It's been just a dynamite place to spend the time too. So this is a shot of what the rock shelter looks like in 2013, I think this one is. And you can see we have multiple excavation blocks. This one right here is a long trench, a series of 3 1x2 meter excavation units. This is out towards where the stream channel is located. There are other excavation units that are back here that I can't see real well. And then these are the sandbags that Dale was talking about, that when we are excavating at the rock shelter, we screen all of our dirt from our excavations into piles, and then we fill our sandbags with those we fill our sandbags with that screen dirt, and then we use those sandbags to backfill the units at the end of the field season. So one thing you do not tell the archaeology students when they first come up to work at the site or apply to pay money to come and work at the site is that they're going to have to move probably about 2,000 to 3,000 sandbags at a minimum to get down to where they need to dig. So we'll just keep that between us for now. This is in 2016. We have done a lot of work at the site. You get a really good look at where that basalt rim is, and then you can see the shadowing, the shady area that is a protected place in the summertime. And in the wintertime, the winds blow from the southwest they trend from the southwest and come across the top of the rock shelter and blow over it. So when you're back here and it's really cold, but the sun's out, the wind may be blowing, but it's nice and calm back there, and it's just a really nice, comfortable place to hang out, even whether it's winter or summer. It doesn't provide much protection from the rain. You have to really tuck yourself in back there. So in a sense, it's more of an open site than it is an actual rock shelter. It's not a place like Paisley Caves or Connolly Caves or Fort Rock Cave, where there's been dry protected areas in there that store lots of really nice basketry and perishable fragments of materials used by humans. Most of the time we get a few animal bones, a lot of stone tools, and not much else. So we don't get the same sorts of things you expect to see in other rock shelter sites. So I want to talk about water and how important water is to this site. So this is the same picture you saw previously, what the place looked like in 2009. This picture here shows the rock shelter off in the distance, and you can see the white sandbags that are surrounding the excavation units. And what this shows is where the water comes through, and you can see a very distinct channel scar coming down past the rock shelter and down this way. That flows out for about a half a mile from this location, and then it dumps out into an open alluvial sort of an area that's got lots of sand dune building. You can't see the channel flow from there, but the channel that starts and goes past this and continues past the line of the photo ends up draining into Malheur and Harney Lakes in the long term. And so it's at one time carried a great deal of water. There's been a lot of channel scarring here across this area, but it hasn't carried water in about 7,000 years or so, and I'll explain why in just a second. Oh, and then here it is in basically the northwest portion of Harney County in southeastern Oregon. So this view here is taken from on top of the rock shelter. We're up on the basalt rim and looking down, and you can see the line of that channel that is curving past this way and then down and out. It eventually goes past that juniper in the distance and out towards Silver Creek and the lakes that I mentioned previously. We keep repeating keep mentioning that dry stream channel because it's so important to the reason that people were here using this site. Question Tom Stafford, who's been doing a lot of work at the site with us and making notes on his hands about is, why would people want to live in a desert like this? And what Tom came to when he was out working with us is he determined that there's essentially a three-part sequence to the sediments that are present at this site. Starting at the bottom with the oldest sediments, number 3, we have an area in the middle of the stream channel of high energy boulders, cobbles, and gravels from flood events and stream transport over time. You can see where Tom and Jordan Pratt are sitting here looking at the sediments in a trench adjacent to the rock shelter. You can see these dense black clay marsh deposits right here that are distinctly separated right here along this line. And Tom views those as cienega deposits, or cienega is a slow-moving stream channel or oxbow that has holds water like a pond, but stays there for an extended period of time. So above the high energy boulders and gravel is the marshy clay deposits. And then above that, you can see that when this marsh was coming to a finish, that the whole landscape became desertic or xeric, and the sediments change from marsh clays and muds to windblown sand, sediments, and volcanic ash. And this little band right here above those marsh clays is a layer of Mazama ash from the eruption that formed Crater Lake 7,600 years ago. So here's that a pretty classic example of a cienega or a slow moving stream in a marshy sort of a setting. This is from down along the Blitzen River at the near the valley floor, and it's just provided here as an example of what that area might have looked like at one time when water was flowing through there. So we've got water and stream flow, and we have ponding in the form of a cienega, and then we have the deposition of sediments that help give us the site that we have at Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter and help to verify that the site was protected for an extended period of time. So this is another view of those trench deposits, and I like showing these over and over because we've dug four different trenches at Rimrock Draw in the past 10 years. And each of them shows the same sequence of sediments, but in a slightly different form, whether you're up against the rock shelter where people have been moving around and trampling the sediments, or you're out in the main stream channel adjacent to the rock shelter, or you're in the stream channel further downstream. We've trenched at all those places, and we see the same things just in slightly different forms. So here's the windblown or aeolian sands that in this area are about 5 or 6 feet thick. This is the marsh clay that is below that windblown sand. And then down here we have gravel and boulders, lots of gravel here, not so many boulders right here in this spot from stream transport. So that stream is coming down from the highlands, is curving around past the rock shelter, and it is swinging by and on its way to other places. And that was a steady presence for probably about 5,000 to 6,000 years or so. And then after that, we have those marsh deposits. And then after that, we lose all of our water for this location, and we get nothing but windblown sands and silts. And it's just very pronounced and very distinct. So this is a close-up of that same trench after we've been doing some sampling there. And so here you see these dark, kind of blackish, grayish, very different colored sediments from above. So right here you have the marsh clay. Up here you have the windblown sediments. And then in between we have a fine bead of primary deposit from the the Mazama eruption that occurred 7,600 years ago. It seems like it came down and it stuck on that clay and it held. And then over time, as more volcanic ash was deposited in other places around the vicinity, volcanic ash blew in and was redeposited in the rock shelter area in a layer that's more diffuse. It's still pretty distinct, but it's redeposited in relation to this material right here. So Jan, did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. So that's really important. So everything down below this bead of Mazama tephra is older than 7,600 years in age. And everything above it is younger. So this photograph got a little bit stretched, but this is in a trench that's downstream from the rock shelter about a quarter mile away. And Jake is in there working on profiling the sediments and taking sediment samples. And what you can see here is, again, you have that aeolian or windblown sediment from the surface down to this thick line. That thick white line marks the beginning of the reworked Mazama. The primary Mazama is on the top of the marsh clays right here. And then you have these marsh clays that go down. They're prismatic, they're blocky. They go down here to where you can see a transition into a more oxidized looking stream gravel. And so from here, there's less aeolian sediment because it's further downstream and it's more windswept. There's less material that's been held in place, but you have clearly the same sequence of events here as you do up at the rock shelter itself. And then this is a schematic drawing of what those sediments look like in profile, and Tom Stafford did this profile himself. This is the surface of the aeolian sediment here. This is where you have banding that includes not only some Mazama ash, but also some diatomite at different places. And then you have those black muds, the basal gravel. And then down here, this little red triangle right here is where we found an delaminated but intact bison tooth that was, we were able to date that tooth to 13,000 years in age. Is 11,190, but 13,100 calibrated radiocarbon years right there at that spot. Around it in those basal gravels, we were finding big flakes of obsidian that were paper thin and completely unmarred by stream tumbling, which indicated that they were probably deposited there by someone who was doing whatever was related to where that bison tooth was. That's a bit of a conjecture, but the fact that those flakes are so well preserved in that location seems to suggest that, you know, we can make a case for that. This is a radiocarbon date on sediments from the area where the Mazama ash was recovered, and we have a date of radiocarbon 6,770 radiocarbon years, or calendar years 7,662, which matches really well with what we expect from Mazama ash. So we're not only getting dates on other materials at the site, but we're also getting dates on these sediment layers that are in this context of this black cienega mud and these gravels, and things are kind of starting to point from 4-figure dates into 5-figure dates, which is pretty exciting. And then this is a view, we're talking about dirt still. And so this is a view of the profiling that we did inside of the rock shelter itself. So this is the profile of Unit 2, the east wall. And the profile shows again that aeolian sediment that's pretty thick from here to here. And then, and then we have the marshy deposits, the darker sediments associated with the marsh here. And then we have a lot of pieces of rock that are from a collapse of the basalt rim at one time. And those pieces of rock that you see there, those boulder concentrations, are really important because they cap and protect an older sandy layer that is underneath that continues down to bedrock right here. So it's kind of stair steps here. But this rock layer right here, we see throughout the area of the rock shelter, and it's different from what we see in the other deposits at the site because it is in that rock shelter setting where people were, and it changes it breaks apart the different stratigraphic layers of human occupation in a really important way. So what I'm going to talk about mostly here in the next part of this our units over across we've done about 50 units, varying sizes at the site. The most important ones for our dating purposes are here at units 18 and 19, unit 2, and unit 30. Those are right up against the rock shelter wall, which is this line right here. It goes like this. And then we have a couple of units that are important across on the other side of the stream channel from where these are. This map is collapsed a little bit. These should be pushed out another 10 meters or so from where they are, but we wanted to show all the units in conjunction with each other. The units have, the numbering looks odd for this because the units were open sequentially and numbered sequentially. So each of those units reflects the time during the 10 years of work that we've done when that unit was open. Units 1 and 2 are present right here. Unit 3 is here. Those are the first 3 units we dug at the site, and then the rest were added on after. So the questions that we have about the site is, how do people use the rock shelter? How old is it? Is it intact? Is it in an erosional or a depositional setting? And then what's the paleo-environmental context of the site? And if you look down here, there's a helpful list of different periods when occupations occurred in the Northern Great Basin that are associated with stem points and Paleo-Americans that lived in this area from about 7,500 to about, well, looks like maybe as far as back as 18,000 years. But the Pleistocene is important because that is the Ice Age epoch that was from 2.5 million to about 12,000 years ago. And at about 18,000 years ago, we start to see a transition from the Ice Age into more warming conditions. Not particularly nice, but warming from what they were. And at 18,000 years is about when we see the earliest sites at Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. So that's an important one. So next, talk about the gear. So I talked a little bit about the water. I've talked a little bit about the sediments that are there and how consistent they are. And now I want to show you some of the artifacts that are present at the site. And so in terms of what we see as far as the transition to more desert-like or xeric conditions at the site, that is mirrored in a sense by the archaeological material. So in this table that I have here, all of these artifacts that we see here that are in the white text are made after about 6,500 years ago. And so we have in total, it's closer to 13 or 14 now, but we only have about 14 artifacts that are made after about 6,500 years ago that are present at the site. And they include arrow points and a few dart points, corner notched in particular, but types that are very distinct to a late time period. And the majority of the artifacts that are diagnostic to a time period that we see at the site are well over 100. And they include northern side notch points to different kinds of stem points and some crescents and some fluted points that look like they may be, or fluted bifaces that look like they may be Clovis related, going back into the 13,000 year time range. But in general, most of the material we see here was made before 6,500 years ago. So the archaeological evidence of this site seems to go well with the transition from wetter conditions to drier conditions. People stopped coming here after things started to dry out and become more desert-like. These are examples. These wonderful photographs that were done by a student, Katie Lancaster, and these are the kinds of stem points that we see. Most of the points that we're seeing are broken, like they were broken during use. They were carried to the site and refit. The atlatl and spear weaponry was refit with new stone points. The broken ones were taken off and tossed aside at the site. And that's what we see are these broken bases. Just very infrequently do we see a complete stem point like this one. But these are, we can identify these as 5 different kinds of stem points that were made between about 7,000 years ago and about 13 to 14, 15,000 years based on what we're seeing at Paisley Caves. So these get back there quite a ways. These are just examples of more types of stem points that we are seeing at the site, just to show the variation in the types of points and as reflected by their bases. There's quite a bit of variation at the site. A lot of people were coming there and dropping points and dropping broken ones and replacing them with new ones. The other thing that we're seeing, and these start to really happen when you get down below the rock collapse of the rock shelter, we're seeing very fine quality agate or cryptocrystalline silicate stone tools that are for specialized purposes. So you can see like this is an awl or a perforator with a very well-shaped pointed tip. This is an engraving tool. It has multiple spurs at different places along the edge. This is not a cutting edge. These are like for doing engraving on pieces of bone or wood. And then we have some tools like this one that have engraving tips on them. They have curved edges, concave edges for doing like scraping of curved surfaces. And then on the other side, we have convex edges that are for scraping of another purpose. These are specialized tools. These are the tools of craftspeople. These aren't the everyday sorts of artifacts that you see at the site. And they add a certain level of mystery to the site because they indicate that people are doing things there very early on that are different from what they were doing thereafter. We also have crescents. These are all fragments, but we have found a couple of complete ones since I took this photograph, or I'm sorry, Katie did. Crescents similar to like this one over here. And complete crescents are uncommon, but when we see crescents, we associate them with a 7,000 to 12,000 year time period that indicate that people were utilizing these types of stone tools around shallow lake edges. There's a number of different ideas about what crescents were used for, but it seems like in that setting that they are most suited to being used as a small hand sickle of a sort that is held in your index finger and used to cut bunches of bulrush or cattail or something like that. They've also been identified as a distinct type of transverse point for knocking waterfowl out of the air. But the thing that remains consistent about them is they're at shallow lake sides, playa lakes, and the Great Basin of the Intermontane Western North America. So what are they doing at Rimrock Draw right next to a stream channel? Is something we'll talk about here in just a little bit. Are there any questions so far? Everybody just kind of hanging on for dear life?
One thing that I've noticed with this crescent, it's very much like Ed uses to get tules, which has a handle, and then it has that curve coming out, so you can kind of grab the cut through the tule.
So like it's fitted into a wooden sort of
yeah. And it's what do they call them? Oh, it's a bark something. It's a different, but it's a long handle with a blade on it. But his blade, he sharpens into a curve like that. To help
Oh, that's great.
pull in and cut off the toolies and cattails, but he's more interested in toolies.
Yeah, they're interesting at their site at this site because they're just a little bit out of place.
What's that? Oh,
And then, so I showed you a number of different kinds of stone tools, and one of the great things about living in Oregon and working on the east side of the Cascades is that we have about close to, I think, 150 geochemically sourced obsidians from different places around the volcanic country. Excuse me. And so we were able to geochemically source a number of the artifacts from this site. Rimrock Draw is this yellow dot right here. And most of the sources that we're finding are in fairly close proximity. You can't see it here, but this map shows primarily the southeastern part of Oregon. Summer Lake is over here. We have some obsidian from Coghlan Butte, which is close to Paisley. We have some from Silver Lake, Sycan Marsh over closer to Klamath Country. Alturas fine grained volcanic from California, Coyote Spring from Nevada, and then a few sources up by John Day. But most of them are fairly localized in the area between the Ochoco Mountains here and the very northwest portion of the Northern Great Basin with Harney and Malheur Lake over here.
Hey, Pat,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So as you're going down through the different strata, are you seeing material come from different parts of the state depending on how deep you go, or does it seem pretty consistent that it's kind of randomly sourced?
In terms of the obsidian sources?
Yeah, I was just curious if maybe earlier, when you get to the earlier strata or the older portion of the site, if you see materials coming from a different place than some of the later, strata closer to 7,000.
They're they're similarly dispersed throughout the deposits. And the reason for that is that there's about 10 obsidian sources within 10 miles of the site. So Glass Buttes is a huge obsidian source that is right here. It's about 10 miles away from Rimrock Draw. And then we have China Lake and Wagon Tire and Tank Creek and a number of those. So all of the usual suspects are showing up throughout the deposits.
Makes sense. Thanks.
And then the more distant sources are showing up intermittently, but not in a pattern that suggests that, you can see something, a change over time in the mobility of the people that were coming there.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what size these tools are from the black and white squares that you had there.
I'm sorry. Oh, those are, the scale is in centimeters. So most of those tools range in size from 1.5 inches to about 3 inches. Some are a little bit larger than that. Some get into the 5-inch sort of range. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. So those are examples of some of the stone tools, and we have to keep this going fairly quickly because I have a ton more photographs to show you, but I just can't in a presentation like this. So I'm kind of jumping from one subject to the next. And what I want to talk about next is the plants. And what we can see throughout the deposits from surface down to bedrock is that we have consistently plants that suggest that there was a pretty arid landscape at times, or nearby there was some aridity, and so we have sagebrush, rabbitbrush, and juniper showing up regularly throughout the deposits. But then as we get deeper into the deposits, out of the aeolian sediments and down closer towards the rockfall that is toward the back of the rock shelter, we have these fire pits that contain those fuel woods like sagebrush and juniper, but we also have medicinal and utilitarian plants that include willow, serviceberry, chokecherry, bitterbrush. We get bulrush, wapato. We also get wada, which is a lakeside plant that is more associated with places like perennial shallow lakes. And then we also have some unknown hardwoods that are showing up. So the range of plants that we're seeing there has the same common types that seem to mostly be used for fuel. And then we see these plants that are more associated with upland environments and lakeside settings that are showing up in the cooking hearths. So this is a lousy photograph, but a place that shows where we collected some bulrush seeds that were burned, and we got radiocarbon dates of 9,000, calibrated years of 9,400, almost 9,500 and 9,300. And then we have wapato that is coming. You can see it sitting right on top of the rocks that are part of that rock fall. And we have wapato that is in the 10,000 year time range at this site. And wapato, you may know, is a shallow, not a shallow water, but a quiet water, sort of an arrow leaf shaped plant with big tubers that are known as Indian potatoes. And there's an area about 50 miles away from where this location is called the Shiwakan Marsh. And Shiwakan is the Klamath tribal name for wapato or Indian potato. So at one time they were common in that area, and at this site they were used 10,000 years ago. Other dates that we have are sagebrush. The most recent date is 4,000 years, 4,500 years, I'm sorry, calibrated. We have willow at almost 7,000 years. We have some sagebrush at 8,000 years and also at 9,000 years. So these are mostly plant remains that are being found on top of that rock layer from when there was a wall collapse sometime around 10,000 years ago. And then we have rocks. So yeah, we got to talk about the rocks because they're so important to the dates that we get a little ways down the road here. So the dates I was showing you just previously show site use between about 4,500 and 10,000 years ago. But now what happens when we get underneath the rockfall? And we look at two places because those are where we have the consistent materials that show us the preservation of the sediments underneath the rockfall is good and consistent. So unit 2 that was dug in 2012 and units in 18 and 19 that were dug between 2014 and 2021. So this little map here, this is an earlier iteration of the unit map from Rimrock Draw. The quads where we're getting material underneath the rockfall here is in unit 2, and then about 3.5 to 4 meters away in units 19 and 18. 18 is toward the back of the rock shelter, and 19 is out from it just a little bit. So comparing those two, we see some really interesting things. But we had to get through the rocks first. And so this is a fellow that taught us how to split rocks. This is another thing we didn't tell the students, that once you come on this screw, you have to lift rocks out of deep places and get them up onto the surface and out of the way. And so Terry's showing us how to use wedges and feathers to split big chunks of rocks to get underneath them and into the protected deposits below. here's where Terry was working, got those rocks out of the way. You can see the upper layer of rocks right here along the wall of the excavation. And then after we broke those rocks out, this is the crew working in 2012 to get underneath them. So you can see that there's actually quite a bit of sediment buried under that rock layer right there. And right now they're coming down onto bedrock, and they're almost through to the bottom of Unit 2. These are the rocks that we were seeing in Unit 19 and also in Unit 18. So these are more broken and jumbled, but this is such an important picture because we had to carefully excavate through these rocks to get underneath to where the protected archaeological deposits are. And you can look at this, and we had already taken some rocks out of this, but you can look at this and you can see that there's not going to be much vertical transport of artifacts or other materials between this rock layer and the aeolian sediments up above. It's capped and it's protected for the long term right here. So let's see. So those are the rocks that I was talking about. Those are cool rocks. And they've done us a great service by making our life so difficult for about 5 years. So now we're talking about the animals that are present at the site. And so when we busted through that rock layer in Unit 2 that I was telling you about, and showed you the picture of all those poor suffering students down deep in that hole, when they broke through that rock layer in 2012 in Unit 2, they found a layer of volcanic ash that was from the Mount St. Helens eruption of 15,300 to 15,600 years ago. That's calendar years. So we didn't know it at the time. We found a nice gray band of tephra down there, and we thought it was Mazama because that's what you always expect to see in that country, especially when you have a lot of it out in the front stream channel. But when we sent it off to Nick Foyd at Washington State University, he determined that it was a very clean, high quality, 98% coefficient of Mount St. Helens ash from 15,300 years ago. So that St. Helens ash was underneath the rock layer at 265. At 273 to 278 centimeters, we found big chunks of tooth enamel that we knew were from a Pleistocene extinct animal, but we didn't know what it was. And that turned out to be camel tooth enamel. And so underneath that, we found a big flake of chalcedony that was a stone tool. And it was, so when you're looking at these stone tools like this, you're looking at this layering, 265, 273 to 275, and then this was at 285. If those things were in their proper location, having sat there for without being altered or disturbed or shifted up and down the deposits, then that suggests that everything that's underneath this Mount St. Helens tephra is probably older than 15,300 or 15,600 years in age. So that means that the camel tooth enamel, what we found out later was camel, is older, and that the chalcedony flake is older than that camel tooth enamel. So things are starting to really get exciting at that point because we're looking at these really old dates. The potential for these really old dates capped by a layer of Mount St. Helens volcanic ash. And these are a couple of different views of that stone tool after we found it. We had blood residue analysis done on this stone tool, and it tested positive for bison blood residue, or bovid, I should say. And so in this case, it's not camel, but it is bovid. So it turns out that this stone tool was utilized to cut up or process extinct species of bison. So these are some of actually these are all of the pieces of camel tooth enamel that we found in that site. And you can see this big piece here is the one in this person's hand right here. So that's a large animal right there. And then Edward Davis at the University of Oregon Geology Department, he's a paleontologist, hauled out some samples, some fossils from the Juntura Formation over in Eastern Oregon, and we got a great match on this camel tooth enamel right here with this big camel maxilla fragment here. It just looks as close as can be to camel tooth enamel. So Tom Stafford, who was out there working at the site, doing profiling and other work there, did all of our tooth enamel radiocarbon dating, and he's done most of the other radiocarbon dating, but specifically focusing on the tooth enamel. And you can see different photographs of that big piece. This is where the piece was taken off to get the radiocarbon date on this specimen. And this is the material that he cleaned, and we used a micro drill to get in there and get preserved organic material that could be radiocarbon dated. The date that we got, this was in the fall of 2018 was the first date we got on this. And that date puts us at 18,300 calendar years. And so that was very exciting, because with that volcanic ash above it at 15,003 and this camel tooth enamel at 18,003, then we have that stone tool that's underneath both of those things. The chronology of these dates is correct. The more recent is above the older, and then we have a stone tool underneath that. So what we needed to do is get more radiocarbon dating done on this particular specimen and on others, so we could make sure that we have the correct dates before we actually publish this. Because you don't want to publish one date. One date is an anecdote. It's not an actual consistent trend. So at the same time that we were finding camel tooth fragments over in unit 2, we were working in units 18 and 19 and finding bison teeth fragments. There's one piece here. It's really dark and it's really deep back there, but you can see we've broken through the rock layer and we're getting down into that sandy layer, and we're starting to find bison teeth and stone tool fragments, including chipping debris down underneath those rocks. And we're getting material of a different kind that can be radiocarbon dated also. So this shows you the camel tooth enamel from unit 2, dating at 18,000 calibrated years to 18,361. Then the bison tooth enamel fragments we were getting are dating at 17,300 to 17,700. They're 5 meters apart basically, and we're getting dates in the mid 17s to the low 18s, in association with stone tools. With with the bison teeth that we were getting in units 18 and 19, we decided to have some blood residue done on those. And turned out that the blood residue analysis tested positive for horse. This yellow example is horse, bovid or bison. So we have 1 horse blood residue, 2 bison blood residue, and we have mountain sheep on this one. These 2 didn't produce blood residues. So we have extinct horse, extinct bison, and then we have camel tooth enamel. looking at those two sets of units together, we also found, this is the chalcedony stone tool that we found in Unit 2. In Unit 19, just across the way where we were finding the bison teeth, we found another piece of that same material that's about the same elevation, within a few centimeters of each other in terms of depth. So we have the same stone that's showing up in both of those locations, and then we have stone tools that are of a similar morphology or a form that have multiple cutting edges. This one's a really kind of a cruddy local obsidian called the Upper Gap source, obsidian source, but it's configured in the same way to do the same type of job as this one. And so this stone tool had bison blood residue. This one had horse blood residue on it. So within a few centimeters of each other, we're finding the same tool stone, and within a few centimeters of each other, we're finding the same types of tools that are used to cut up extinct animals. So that kind of gives you a sense, and this is real choppy, but it gives you a sense of the artifacts are telling us a certain story in association with the sediments that we're seeing at the site. And that story is basically that we have people there for a very long time, but about 7,000 years ago or so, after the eruption of Mount Mazama, the landscape changed from one that had plenty of water in various forms to one that was completely dry and windblown. And the types of artifacts that we see after that 7,000 year period are rare to non-existent at that site. So the archaeology says that people stopped coming there after 7,000 years ago, but that people were coming there and doing various things in association with the processing and use of extinct animals up until about 18,000 years ago. So our latest thing, this happened in 2021. On the very last day of excavation, we were working in Unit 30, which is adjacent to Unit 2. And we found on the very last day, I have to repeat that, Camclops incisor that was buried underneath a rock that we had drilled and split with wedges to keep digging underneath. And so we found this camel incisor. You can see this is a incisor from about a 1,600-pound bison that's in my comparative collection. And this is an elk incisor from a pretty large elk too. But you can see the difference between these two incisors and this one. And this one is missing the root. So this is just the blade of the tooth right here. And so the first dates that we got were in 2018, and we were focused on getting a date on that camel tooth, but we also did some bison teeth at about the same time. So in 2018, we got Camclops teeth that dated to 14,975 radiocarbon years, or between close to 18,250 calendar years. So we redated that material in 2023, or we got the results of that day, redating that in 2023, and we did a third round of dates on camel using that new incisor that we found in 2021, and they all come back in this 18,250 to 18,600 year time range. So we are confirming with 3 separate tests on the same material, or for camel teeth, that those camel teeth were deposited there in association with stone tools 18,250 years ago at a minimum. We've now done 3 different dates, sets of dates on bison teeth, that are all coming back in a time range from 17,100 essentially to 17,700, and those are all in association with stone tools or chipping debris from making stone tools. So what we're seeing and what we've been trying to do for the longest time is make sure that our dates on these tooth enamel fragments that are coming out in association with stone tools are consistent, so we can actually present these dates in a peer-reviewed journal. And as of last month, that's the third set of dates that we got back, we can now say that we believe strongly in the dates that we have, and others who have been involved in the process, including Tom Stafford and John Southen at the Radiocarbon Dating Lab at UC Irvine, were all strongly enough of the opinion that these dates are correct, that they were willing to put these out in the form of a press release that came out in July of this year. So now we move on to writing up the results of this for the scientific journal, for the peer-reviewed scientific journals, and putting this out in a way that others can look at the information and check our conclusions. So also on the last day of the excavation in 2021, when we were working on the north side of the stream channel, we thought there was a spring over there that fed the Cienega system that was active after the stream stopped flowing about 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. And we found a seep over there that indicated that there was water coming out of a spring feed on the opposite side of the stream channel. And these are some of the artifacts that we discovered when we were working over there in association with that spring fed seep. Unfortunately, when we came back there to work this year in 2023, there had been so much rain and so much snow over the course of the winter that when we took our sandbags out, we were standing in 1.5 feet of water. And it took almost 4 weeks of our 6-week field school to get to where we could actually get into those units and do any work. So we weren't able to add much more information in this field season to the information that we got in 2021. But we do know that given the discoveries we've had since 2012 with camel, horse, and bison, blood residues or tooth enamels present at the site, that we have stone tools in association with extinct animals that are dating between 17,000 and 18,000 years in age, in calendar years. So just to recap a little bit, we have the chalcedony stone tools and chipping debris found in those 2 units. Large mammal tooth enamel concentrated at similar depths in both locations. Stone tools associated with Ice Age animals, blood residues, and consistent stratigraphic layers that similar elevations or similar depths in the deposits all the way across. So because of the rockfall that we have in that location, bearing the deepest deposits with those animal teeth and stone tools, we know that those sites have been preserved in place for the last 18,000 years, and that the dates that we're getting and the deposits that we have, the dates are correct and the deposits are intact. So that is the thing that we have been trying to tease out of the site for the last 10 years, and it looks like we finally accomplished it. So as I was talking about a little bit earlier, we have crescents, and we have certain types of plants, edible and utilitarian plants present at Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter that suggests there was big water somewhere nearby. And so that stream flow declined, but it was coming through there with enough force that it had to be coming from a big source of water. And so during COVID, I was out there for about 3.5 weeks, walking all the streams coming down towards the rock shelter and looking at all the playas and looking at mapping and that. And what we found, what it looks like we found, is that Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter is on the backside of a big playa or a big lake that now is represented by 3 distinct large playas that are dry. So there's stream flow coming into the playa from different directions, a lot off of Juniper Ridge, filling up this basin. And this ridge was once connected from over off in the distance here to the edge of Juniper Ridge, and there was a small outlet that was feeding water out of this big lake and down past the rock shelter, providing the I'm sorry, that was providing the resources for people living here to come across here and find wada and wapato, use crescents on shallow marsh plants, and probably sit up on this low ridge and scan for animals that would have been also using this large lake setting. So anyway, we've gone through all of this stuff already quite a bit. So, but one of the things that I think is so important is that we see an example of a significant shift in climate change and climate that occurred about 7,000 years ago, based in part on the eruption of Mount Mazama, and that people stopped coming to this location because of that. So we have an 11,000 year record of human use intermittently at this site, dating from 18,000 to 7,000 years ago. And despite the proximity of a great obsidian source like Glass Buttes, less than 10 miles distant, people stopped coming when the water disappeared. And I think that is something that archaeologically is very important as we look at changes in climate during our time here. So I'm going to end it there, but I want to just point out the number of people that were involved in this project, the U of O Field School students in particular, our OAS volunteers, and a tremendous amount of funding and support that we've gotten from the Bureau of Land Management, the Museum of Natural and Cultural History, and various donors along the way. So we've made a lot of friends and had a lot of support over the years, and it's time to really start bringing this excavation to a close and start writing the results and making sure that this gets presented in a form that everyone can appreciate. So thank you for having me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
That rockfall that buried all that stuff, what was there some kind of an earthquake or something that would bring all that stuff down at one time?
It seems it's hard to know. That location is right along the what I think would be the it would be the southeastern margin of the Brothers Fault Zone. So there could be some seismic shifting there. It could also be that the seismic activity associated with the eruption of Mount Mazama did something to destroy the subsurface hydrology of the region and cut off spring flow to a great extent, or that could be a part of the reason why we didn't have much water coming out of that spring as we might have had in the past. There's a lot of reasons, and we need to do a lot more work on the geologic front to try and figure out those kinds of answers. But the thing that stands out so easily in the midst of all of this is the fact that shortly after Mazama blew up and formed Crater Lake and deposited all that ash out there, the place went dry and desertic, and just people stopped coming there. So that says something pretty strong right there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Any other questions? All right. Dale? I guess we're done then. Dale, what do you have to say? I can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted, Dale.
Could you stop sharing this? If you open that up, then we can see hands up and stuff. And
Oh,
your,
stop sharing it. Okay.
there you are.
Okay, there you go.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Other questions on this?
No, I just think it was really great, and I'm glad I got to see most of it. Sorry about the cat. I forgot I put that in there for my office.
I like it.
You can see I'm talking. If I'm well, I'm not sitting. So
Well, thanks.
anyway, thank you guys for all this hard work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot, and just being able to tie some of those ancient animals to people in a place that's just really out of the way. It's such a modest rock shelter, but it's such an important place.
Other questions?
I have a kind of practical question, like for students, but if a student has physical disabilities, how able are they to do field school? Like, say they can walk around and lift, like 30 pounds maybe occasionally, but not the type of sandbagging you're referring to.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Each according to their ability, is whatever we can do to make things work.
Right. Yeah.
It's a rugged piece of country.
They help, as Patrick wouldn't know. So I'm sure we would have things with screening and things with mapping and recording.
Yeah, there's lots of different kinds of work to do other than sandbagging, but it's
I'm glad you don't tell students about it before they get there. But they're excited to get going, so I'm sure they move fast.
Oh yeah, this people who come out and spend 6 weeks at a site like that are pretty motivated in general. They aren't doing that on a whim, at least most of the time anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated this presentation. I thought it was really awesome. The reason why I'm asking is because I'm physically disabled and I definitely can't do that work, but I'm starting a master's degree in archaeology and I want to do field work. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of different field opportunities out there. I'm kind of I'm in the wrap up phase. I'm not going to be doing archaeological field schools anymore at that site, but I am going to be doing some field work in the next couple of years to bring things to a close. And it may be more of a volunteer sort of a program out there, but we're working on those transitions right now. If you want to get in touch with me and talk about things, just please drop me a line.
I would love to. Thank you.
Ryan, was that Ryan?
Can you hear me okay now? Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, we can hear you, Ryan.
Thanks.
Muted.
I was curious if you were able to do any more research on the possible location where that chalcedony chert came from. I know there's some similar material that comes along the coastline in Central Oregon, near like Lincoln City. And I was just wondering if you had any sense as to whether it could have come from a further geography.
So the one thing that we know, and one of the things that was so fabulously striking about finding that stone tool is that for those of us who worked out in the Northern Great Basin, that material is completely unfamiliar to us. since I've started chasing down leads related to that type of, some people call it carnelian too. It's a low grade carnelian because it's translucent, but it's not clear. You know, it's not like beautiful gemstone, but it's really high quality. But it gets called orange peel carnelian or orange peel chalcedony because it does look like an orange rind. And we think we've identified a location, a general location up by John Day. There's quite a bit of different types of silica stone, cryptocrystalline silicates of various kinds in the Ochako Mountains, which lie to the north and east of the location, beginning about 50 miles away. And so it might be from there. There's some beautiful chalcedony stones that come out of the southern Oregon coastline, the Klamath River, you know, the Siskiyou Mountains down in that area, and then up on the north to middle coast, like you were talking about. But what we need to do is gather a set of samples that we can then geochemically test and see if we can try and pin down, you know, if there is a chemical signature that'll tell us more specifically where that came from. But we think for now that it's probably from the Ochakos and not as far away as the Oregon coast, although we do know that the obsidian does show up on the coastline from glass buttes on a regular basis.
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. I noticed some of the other shirt tools that you had looked similar to what I've heard called Harney mud shirt.
Yeah.
And so it made me wonder if that might be from there.
Yeah, definitely. There's that one on the right side in that one, you know, those specialized stone tools, that definitely looks like Harney mud shirt to me. Beautiful
Thanks.
quality though.
Other questions? I have one, Patrick, on the remnants of a basin lake you see there. How, I mean, you had a massive basin lake there, you know, during glaciation, I guess after glaciation. Was that part of or close to the Rimrock and Lahontan Lake, Basin Lake, Lahontan?
So over in the area,
Fort Rock Cave was in a basin lake, wasn't it?
yeah, so you have Lake Chihuacan, which is the big Summer Lake Basin. You have Fort Rock Lake to the north. Pleistocene Lake Malheur is to the south. So we don't have the great big lakes like Lahontan and Bonneville in Oregon, but we did have, I mean, these are respectable Pleistocene lakes at one time. And they were scattered with some regularity all around the area.
Mm-hmm.
So the one that's right next to where the rock shelter is actually, it would be a very large, shallow lake. It was based on the dimensions in that topographic map overlay that I showed you. It's about 6.5 to 7 miles long by about 3 miles wide, which isn't a big deal, but it would have been the hydrologic force coming out of that lake into a shallow channel at different times of the year would have done some pretty significant reworking of the geology of that channel, modifying it the way that it did. And there are some aspects of, thank goodness that that rock layer came off of the face of the rock shelter and collapsed on top of those sediments. Otherwise, that stream flow would have probably blown all of that out of there and we would never have seen it.
Other questions? Could you tell me something about that gigantic camel? What was it? What was it like? Any idea?
It was probably like a supersized llama in a sense. They were, oh my gosh, I think they got up to 2,500 pounds and had, they were I was reading about this just recently, and I've been on the move so much that it's kind of slipped my mind. But in my memory, they would have had legs that were about half again the length of modern camels, dromedary camels, and gone up into the 2,000 to 2,500 pound range. So they were long, lanky sorts of creatures, more with the body form of a large llama than a dromedary or a Bactrian camel or something like that.
Hmm.
And they would be associated with what's called the yesterday's camel.
Which camels made it over the land bridge over into the, would it be these big ones or into the old world?
Depends on how far back in time you're talking. The yesterday's camel is
Yeah.
the yesterday's camel is the one we would expect to see in the area around the time that humans were there. And then there are other camels from 25,000 to 40,000 years ago that disappeared off the landscape and to date haven't been shown to be associated with humans.
Hmm.
Those were great big ones too.
Other questions? And pop up, you have them. Well, I think we witnessed one of the neatest projects and finds in North America for sure. And we really appreciate you bringing that to us and look forward to, yeah, I've seen some of the articles, which is very exciting all the way around. So the publications will be real interesting to see.
Well, people are incredibly frustrated with me. The archaeological community is pretty frustrated with me because we haven't published those dates yet. But the problem is that if you get one date of 18,000 years ago and you print that, you're not doing science. You know, you're just jumping a claim in a way. You're trying to get press where you don't deserve it. But what we're trying to do is we've been waiting. So we got our dates in 2018. The first ones that said that the camel tooth enamel was 18,000 years in age. That same fall, December, actually, of 2019, we submitted our next dates, or our next samples for dating that went into the lab for processing. And then in March of 2020, everything shut down because of COVID. And so once the lab started opening back up again, then there were supply issues. So you couldn't get certain important chemicals that you needed for the radiocarbon dating process, the AMS dating process. And so it took a long time to be able to get that next round of dates that told us the first ones appear to be correct. And then we submitted, right after we got the second round, we submitted the next ones. We got those back within 3 months. So now we have 3 sets of dates that tell us the same thing. And now we can talk about it without, opening ourselves up to being, human punching bags.
Yeah, that's a good idea. You were mentioning how it's better to wait and really double check it all.
Yeah. So
thank you. Any other comments? And the person that was wondering about field work, there's a lot of different, I deal with wet sites, so we certainly have people working with us in wheelchairs and working on excavating with water or using water screens. And, we don't quite have to move so much heavy labor, but what Patrick has, you really do have to one, protect it, and that's always the problem is backfill and taking it back out. Our side, we have to have heavy equipment come in and put it in to the squares. That's we wash it away, really. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming over from Burns. I think, sounds like you have a good quality of life change there for your family.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. I know the work that you've been doing for years, and it was a thrill to get the invitation. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I know it was a very busy time for you, and I wasn't sure what until I heard you were moving and getting
Yeah.
and so that's greatly appreciated. I'll send you some I'll send you some of those articles I talked about, but at a point send me your address so I can send you some other things. So
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Thank you all for sitting here and listening.
Bye bye now.
All right.
Have a good
Bye.
evening. Now
You too.
we go to this late, so we're not in any time crunch. That's the nice thing about it. Well, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay.
Yep. Glad you're doing so well.